Welcome to God in the Wild. I'm your host, Kent Harrop. In this first season, we'll explore how nature heals, inspires, and restores us. We'll consider, too, ways in which the natural world connects with and awakens us on our spiritual journey. John Muir, the great conservationist and mystic, put it this way: "Into the forest I go to lose my mind and find my soul." Each episode will reflect upon ways nature speaks into and expands our spiritual lives. Welcome to God in the Wild. I don't like change, and my guess is you don't either. In fact, I come from a family that liked the familiar. My dad, Norman, was a great guy, and he liked predictability. He liked to know what was going to happen each day. And one of my favorite stories is my dad was a carpenter, and he would get up in the morning and he would go to his favorite breakfast place, favorite restaurant. And he always went to the same restaurant at approximately the same time, and he always had the same order. And I remember going with my dad to work when I was young. And we would stop at his favorite restaurant called Babe's. Now, Babe's might be a provocative title, so don't get the wrong idea. Babe was a burly man who had acquired that nickname during World War II while serving in the Navy as a cook. And Babe was one of the hairiest men I'd ever seen. Had hair on his arms, and he always wore a t-shirt and an apron, and he had hair sticking out of his ears. And as a kid, he was just a fascinating person to look at. And he was the short order cook. It was his restaurant, nothing fancy. And each day, 6 days a week, year after year, my dad would drive up to Babe's. He would get out of the car. The waitress would see Norm getting out of the car. And by the time he came into the restaurant and sat at the counter, there would be a cup of coffee with cream and sugar. And there would be an order on the grill for 1 egg scrambled, 1 corn muffin, which is a staple here in New England, with butter on the side, and a glass of orange juice small. 6 days a week, year after year. The waitress didn't have to guess my dad's order. It was already ordered up for him before he even walked into the restaurant. That is predictability, and that brought my dad great comfort. Yet change comes to us all, doesn't it? Change is so disorienting. And when we're dealing with change, there is a grief process. Because with change, we're moving from one location to another. We're saying goodbye to a loved one who has passed. We're letting go of things all the time, aren't we? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her great work on death and dying, talks about the stages of grief. And that comes into play when we're dealing with any change, any type of loss. And she says the first stage of grief is denial, to deny that it's even happening. We hear news that a friend is relocating from one place to another, and we can't believe it. We don't want to even think it is true because they're such a great friend. And then we move into anger. We're angry that this has happened. We shake our fist at the universe, or we shake our fist at the person who has brought about the change. And then there's bargaining. We try to strike a bargain that would kind of moderate the reality of what is going on. This is true if we lose a loved one to death, or there's a change in our employment, or whatever that change may be. It may be a joyous change. It may be a marriage that takes place, and we have to adjust to a new family system as new people come into our circle of relationship. There's all sorts of changes that are painful, that can also be joyful, but they're also disorienting. And so we deny the change because it's uncomfortable or disorienting, or we get angry at the change if it's painful, or we try to bargain and try to moderate the effects of it. And then sometimes with a painful change, particularly with loss, there's depression. We internalize the anger. There's sadness. There's pain. We are grieving the loss. And then hopefully in time we come to acceptance. We accept the loss of a loved one, even as we remember them, even as we honor our relationship with them, even though they have passed. Or we accept that a friend or a coworker has moved to a new location and it has brought about change. That's all to say that change is hard, and oftentimes we do everything we can to avoid it. Yet I'd like to say in a spiritual sense that this unsettled territory to which we are called can also be an opportunity for growth, for expansion. As we move into a new territory, a new way of thinking and being, it can open up parts of us that we weren't aware of before. Richard Rohr, in his book Falling Upward, says that by the second half of life we've dealt with a lot of changes, and that these changes bring about an opportunity for us to reflect upon that which is really important to us, that which we really value. And it also creates an opportunity for us to think about our relationship with that great mystery we call God. Who is God for us really? Not who do others tell us that God is, or our relationship to God is to be like, but who is God, who is Spirit for us really? And in the midst of change, in the midst of the sense of dislocation and disorientation that we may feel, how can we experience, how can we become open to the movement and the presence of the Spirit, of the God, the creator of heaven and earth? Howard Thurman, the great African-American mystic and theologian, and who was a mentor to Dr. King, and for many years taught at the Mars Chapel at Boston University, he said that we are called as people of faith to take our little boat, our little life, and leave the safety of the harbor and go out into the open ocean where, he said, the big ships lie. Change can invite us to leave the comfort of what we know, the comfort of the familiar, the comfort of our harbor. And whether it is by choice or whether it is by circumstances beyond our control, we go out beyond the harbor, beyond the port, out where the big ships are to be found. And that can become a place of discovery. Mitsuda Masahide was a 17th century samurai and poet in Japan. He once said, "The barns burnt down, and now I can see the moon. The barn burnt down, and now I can see the moon." Change, with all of its discomfort, whether we initiate it or it is brought upon us, can offer us a new way of viewing the world. Within my own Christian tradition, Jesus says to his disciples, as he is about to leave them for the final time and ascend to God in heaven, he says to the disciples when they are afraid of the unknown, when they are afraid of what it will be like when they can no longer rely upon him physically to be in their presence, he says to the disciples, "You will do even greater things than me." And the disciples look at one another and say, "What is Jesus talking about? We're so dependent upon him. He knows so much more than us." But Jesus says, "You will do greater things than me." I think he understood that when we step out in faith, when we trust that God, the creator of the heavens and earth, are at work in us individually and collectively, that we can do more even than Jesus. Can you imagine? It's been said, argue for your limitations long enough and sure enough, they're yours. Jesus is saying to his followers then and to people like us today, whatever our faith background may be or lack thereof, stop arguing for your limitations. Start believing in your capacity to do more and become more than you ever thought possible. Soren Kierkegaard, the great theologian of 150 years or so ago, said, God is always present, simply waiting to be found. And that God's Spirit is faithful to us always. I was listening today on my ride over to film this by a song by Jacob Dylan. And Jacob is the son of Bob Dylan. And the song is entitled, Nothing But the Whole Wide World to Gain. Nothing but the whole wide world to gain. I think that's true for us individually and for us collectively. That we journey through this life not alone. We journey in the company of one another. We journey in the company of that great mystery, that great gift we call Spirit. Nothing but the whole wide world to gain. The barn's burned down. Now I can see the moon. We are to journey in faith, trusting that we don't journey alone. This is the good news. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for listening to this episode of God in the Wild. Please share this episode with friends and subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. You can follow God in the Wild on Facebook and Instagram at God in the Wild Pod. You can subscribe online and leave us a rating and review. This podcast is a production of the First Baptist Church of Beverly, Massachusetts. In the spirit of John Muir, go out into the wild and find and feed your soul. I'm Kent Harrop. Thanks for listening.